Hey everybody, and welcome to the tutorial series for the procedural park. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at how to generate our first park. This is meant to be a quick start guide where we go over the entire process of creating a park, all of the different steps. I'm going to be pointing out some tips and tricks as you go through all of the steps, but we're not going to spend a lot of time taking a look at all of the different options. We're going to do that in a separate video later on. So if you're in a hurry, if you just bought this asset and you just want to go ahead and create your park, this is the video that you absolutely need to watch because this will give you an idea of what the buttons do and the different options do. So all right, so let's go ahead and jump into Unreal. And if you watched the previous video, you know that we went over all of the different parts of the project here, but the most important part is that I already have a tutorial level set up for you so we can start learning, right? So if you don't see this, if you're still in the showcase level, make sure you go to Procedural Park, Maps, and open the level tutorial. And this is just a completely empty level, but right here you already have a landscape with material. You have your light source, you have your skylight, and you even have a little post-process volume. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to drag our Park VP to the level. So if we go back to the root folder here, click on Blueprints, go to Tools, and grab BP Park. We're going to go ahead and place this guy right here in the middle. And you'll see that as soon as we drop this guy, we have this little box with a gray, kind of translucent gray marker here. And right here with the park selected, we're going to collapse this here. We're going to take a look at some of the options here and just try to understand the flow of creating the park, right? So basically, if you scroll down here, you'll see that there's a section called Defaults. You have a bunch of buttons here. And the buttons go from 0, you'll see that they're numbered 0, 1, 1A, 1B, 1C, and eventually all the way to 4C here. This is the order of generation. This is the logical order that you'll use to generate your park. So the workflow should be you set your park size and then you click on set parameters. This is if you want to use auto parameters for your size. You spawn your central actors, and your central actors are going to be your main points of interest in your park, right? These are the points where all of the paths converge. Usually they're going to be places with a fountain or bathrooms or a little additional thing inside the park where all of the different paths kind of join together, right? So the idea is that the first thing you'll do is you're going to spawn a certain amount of actors that I'm calling central actors inside this inner volume here. So as you can see, I'm going to zoom in here. We have two volumes. We have this volume here, the big one, which is obviously the park size, but then you have this inner volume here, and this is going to be used to spawn the central actors. Then after the central actors are spawned, you're going to create the pathways. These are basically the little roads that are going to create the entrances to the park from the outer edges of the park and are going to connect all of the central actors together. In a real park, you'll come from the outside in one of the entrances, and if you follow the path, you'll eventually hit one of these central actors, and if you keep going, you'll eventually kind of follow the network of paths until you can come out in a different way, right? After that, we're going to spawn the props, and props are simply the additional objects that are scattered around the park. These are fountains for central actors, but the props would be, for example, a Ferris wheel, little swings or gazebos around. You also have special props that are following the path or random props that spawn around the path. Then eventually you want to spawn your grass and your flowers, and then your foliage, and then any additional props that you like. And then after that, optionally, you can spawn a wind actor if you have trees that can receive that. You have some birds, and then we have some conversion. Once you're happy with this, you can convert your props to hierarchical links and static meshes, and you can convert your foliage from individual actors to hierarchical links and static meshes. And then we have some functions here to apply materials that are already hooked up to the landscape material here to give that final look. So The first thing we'll do is we want to define the size, right? So we're gonna go and scroll all the way up into Setup General, and you can see here that we have bound scale and we have the sizes here. So we can choose any size we want. We can say, okay, I want the X to be 200, and I want the Y, for example, to be 300. And this is going to be your park. You can also set the scale for the inner volume. So maybe the inner volume can be something like 50 and 100. And you can see that you have the inner volume here. And this is going to be the area where the central actors spawn. You can do it manually here, or you can use a park size preset here for your convenience. So if you click on the drop down here, you'll see that we have several categories. So again, if you're looking for speed and you say, I actually want a big park, you can click on big park here, and you'll see that automatically it has a pre-size of 200 by 200. If you click on really big park, it makes it 300 by 300. And if eventually you go to massive park, it's 500 by 500. And it may not look it, but this is a really big park. Because if I zoom all the way down here and I start walking, you'll see that the park is actually pretty big. But these are not hard limits. If I want to make this 800 by 800, it literally flies off the map. But if you want to make something ridiculously big, you can make the park as big as you want, right? So we're going to go back and just actually set this as a big park right here, just for the sake of example here. And once you do that, you have the option of using some auto parameters. So the idea here is that there's going to be parameters that define, let me just click here on parameter presets. There are parameters that define the number of entrances for the park, the number of central actors, the number of area props, number of the foliage density, how many trees, and the density for the grass and flowers. You can set these values individually, right, by going through the details, or you can actually use the auto parameters, and these are values that have been tweaked by myself to play well with the size of the park. And in addition to that, you can select the density by clicking on the drop down and say, actually, I want the number of entrances to be high, medium, or low. So what I did is I created what I consider a fair number of entrances for a big park, and then there's a multiplier. If you do high, it'll include, for example, an extra 50% more of whatever that number is, or an extra 50% less, for example, if you click on low. So you have a lot of flexibility here if you want to use the auto parameters, right? My suggestion would be that you start with your auto parameters, see what you get, and if there are some specific things that you're not happy with, then you go back and tweak them individually. If you go back here, you see that we have a few options here. Marker visible, this is the green marker. By default, it's on, so you can clearly see where your park is. You can disable that. That way you have the transparent view here. Marker hidden, you probably want to have this ticked in. Hidden means that it's not going to show up when you click on play. Show messages is going to show you here status messages as you're spawning things. It'll give you an idea of what the park has done. For example, if I click on set parameters to big park, this is going to set the auto parameters. It'll give you a message saying auto parameters set for big park. That automatically tells you that all of the parameters for all of these different things, entrances, actors, has been set to the settings for big park. You have some material settings here, park material details. We're not going to look at this in this video. This is a bit more detail. We have batch details. Again, this is the number of actors and hierarchical instance static meshes that the park will spawn at a time, and this is to keep performance high. Trace details, we're not going to spend too much time here, but this is the trace that we will use to spawn the different elements of the park, and by increasing or decreasing this number, you can have some positive effects. So for example, for foliage, the trace pattern is actually -50, meaning that if the bounds of the tree are 100 by 100, you're going to reduce that 100 by 100 by -50, which will make it 50 by 50. In other words, you're increasing the density of the trees or decreasing the minimum distance that the trees can spawn. Or you can increase this number to increase the distance between the trees or the foliage. And finally, you have the debug details here, and you have for all of the different categories. If you click on the Boolean here, you'll actually see how the park is doing the traces to determine where the entrances are or the different paths or props, for example. Very useful if you're trying to debug an error or something doesn't look right. You can use the options here. All right, so the first thing we'll do is once we select our park, let's just make it really big just so we can have more stuff up here. We want to use the auto parameters, so we go here and we click on set parameters. You can see that we've set this for really big park. We're going to spawn our central actors, and you see that we've now spawned, in this case, 4 central actors, and they spawn in a random location inside the volume here, as you can see. If you want to remove everything and start over, you can go back here to 4C and say remove everything, and you can spawn central actors again. And you'll see that some of the actors are different, right? Because I have a list of actors and I'm pulling a random number of actors from a random pool of central actors. So this is going to be random. In addition, you can actually move these actors anywhere you want. So let's say that you want to tweak this. You can actually select the actor here and you can move it down here and say, no, I actually want it here. And I want this guy right here, for example. You can tweak that, and I want this guy a little bit more centered here. So once the actors have spawned, you can actually change the location to anywhere you want. Then you go back and select the park by clicking on this billboard here to go back to the park, and now you're ready to spawn your pathways. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here, and then you can click on create pathways. And you see, if I scroll all the way up, that I have pathways that are coming from the edges and connecting all of the different central actors. So there's a network effectively. If a player comes from any of these entrances, they'll eventually hit a central actor, and from this they can either go to any other central actor or any other entrance. And there's settings that you can control on how many entrances you can have per for your park. Those details are going to be looked at in another video, but just want to make you aware. And you have the ability to spam this button more. So let's say that you want more pathways. You can press it again and see that the pathways are being added. Now the pathways are only going to be added to the outer limits of the park, not the inner limits of the park. And you'll see there's a reason for that, right? So you don't want more pathways connecting the central actors. So if I click generate pathways and I keep doing that, you'll see that pathways are added, but eventually you can see here I keep adding them. Eventually you're going to notice that nothing else will spawn, and that's because you can see there pretty much everything else is taken. So there's going to be a point where you can't spawn any more pathways. But you can see here this is obviously probably not what you wanted, but if you wanted to have a park with a bunch of pathways, here's how you would do it. Notice that all of the pathways come from the outside, but the inside of the park is still kept simplified because you don't want a million different pathways connecting the central actors. If you want to start over, you can go ahead and click on remove paths. This is 4A. And then you can click on create pathways again, and you can start over. From there, you can click on spawn props. You can click the button one time, and you'll see that a bunch of props are spawned. There are a lot of settings for spawning your props, and again, we're not going to take a look at that in this video. We just want to make you aware that there are 3 types of props. There are area props, like this Ferris wheel right here, which are going to spawn. They can spawn anywhere on your map, and you have the ability to create a secondary path to that area prop. This is optional, by the way. You don't have to do it. So in the case of this little gazebo here, we have by default selected that we want a path to be created from this area prop to either another pathway or a central actor. You have the bathrooms that are spawning near a central actor, and that's a setting. And also we want them to have a path, because that by design we want the bathrooms to be near the points of interest. While you have other actors like the swings here that don't have any pathways, right? So these guys are just spawning near a path, but there's no connecting path themselves. And then you notice that we have lights. These are what we call fixed pathway props. So basically these props are going to be spawned along all of the different paths at a fixed distance, and you can choose the distance, right? So you can spawn them very close together or very separate. You also have the option to spawn them on one or another side. And eventually you have random pathway props like this table here, picnic table, which are also going to spawn along every pathway, but they're going to have a random chance of spawning, right? So you have the fixed, which are always going to spawn at a set distance, and you have the random, which are going to spawn along the pathways with a random chance to spawn. This is also a random chance to spawn along a pathway. Notice that this doesn't have the tables, which is by design, right? This is an area prop that can spawn anywhere else. All right, so those are the different kinds of props. By the way, you can at this point duplicate props, or you can move them around. So let's say that I wanted more gazebos. I can grab this guy right here, and I could just hit Alt, and with Alt I can drag, and I can spawn and duplicate my gazebos to be on my park. And you can do it as many times as you want. This is the time to spawn as many area actors as you want, right? The next thing is we want to make sure that we spawn grass and flowers. And grass will spawn only if you're showing the floor, and this is by design. So right now, if I click on spawn grass, notice that it says spawn grass is disabled. And the reason for that is because there's no need to spawn grass, because the landscape already has the grass, as you can see here. But if you're spawning this on a city, for example, or you're not using a landscape, you want to make sure that you spawn the grass as hierarchical and static meshes to dress up your park. So in this case, we don't need grass. We're going to go and spawn the flowers, and you click on spawn flowers, and you see that we get a message saying we spawned 4,624 instances of flowers, which is a batch of about 6,000. So if you walk around here, you'll see that the flowers have now spawned in a random areas. Notice that flowers have obstacle avoidance, so flowers have not spawned in any of the area props you can see here, or the pathways. And this is the reason why we want to make sure that we spawn the props before the flowers, so there's no overlap, right? If I try to clone this guy now, he's gonna be probably on top of some flowers, right? So you want to do this before you do the flowers. All right, let's go back to the park. And finally, it's time to spawn our trees, and this is what I call foliage. So in here, you can click on spawn foliage, and right now you'll see that we have these trees that are spawning. You have a choice of spawning one or two models or both, and we're going to take a look at those details in another video. But you can see that you can keep clicking on spawn foliage if you want more and more trees to spawn, and you can see that as you're clicking here, things are spawning. And then from there on, we have spawn additional props. And in this case, you can add pretty much anything you want. In this case, I've added the blueprint for butterflies, right? So if you click on spawn additional props, you see that we spawned 5, and you can see them right here. So I'm gonna select one and press F to focus, and I'm gonna click on simulate. And this is just to show you guys that this is just a little interactive butterfly that's kind of flying around, right? But you can pretty much add anything you want in additional props, right? This is going to be anything that's not related to your park, that's not a prop, that's not a central actor. This is, you know, other blueprints like little animals or anything else that you want to add, you can use it as additional props. And then finally, you can spawn a wind actor. So right now, these trees that are coming from the kite demos, you can see here, and I'm going to click on simulate, are static, right? Nothing, they're not really moving, right? Because these trees are set up to receive wind from a wind actor. So if I click here and I say spawn wind actor, it'll spawn a wind actor, and notice now that the trees are now moving. Now there's a wind actor that's attached to the park that's now causing these trees to move and sway in the wind, as you can see here. There you go. And the other option is to spawn the birds actor. And you click here, and now you look up, and you'll see that there are some birds that are flying around, oops, on top of the park. This is another blueprint from Epic, and this is actually particle effects. These are not real meshes. These are actually particles that are mesh particles that are birds that are flying around. So it's extremely performant, and it just gives it a nicer look at the end. So these are obviously optional, but if you don't have any other birds that you want to spawn, it's just nice to have the birds and the wind. All right, and that pretty much is it for the park. Now notice if we come down here, for example, that the grass is overlapping the pathways, right? So if I click, I'm gonna go ahead and select current camera location and select and play on selected viewport. Notice that as I'm walking around my park, the grass mesh is kind of overlapping the pathway, so it looks kind of crappy, right? You can see that pop in here. So the way you can fix that is you can use a landscape material layer that removes the grass. And in this case, this material, the landscape material, if I go to landscape here and click on paint, you'll see that we have several different layers in the landscape. We have a layer called path, we have a layer called sand, and we have a layer called remove foliage. So you can manually use this in paint. So if you click on here on path and you start painting, you can see that you're actually painting a layer of basically dirt, and it'll automatically remove the grass. Or you can click on sand and you can do the same thing here, and you can see that now we have sand and the grass has been removed, right? If you go back and click on procedural and you paint over it, notice that the grass comes back. Procedural is kind of the base layer that automatically adds grass based on slope. So I've added a very easy way to reduce this problem here of the grass, which is by applying a landscape layer all across the paths. So if you go back and click on park, you can click on apply path material. And if I zoom back in here, apply path material, notice that now the material appears to be dirt, but the grass is still there. And this is just because of the way Unreal treats the material, right? So go ahead and click on the floor right here. This is going to be the landscape. And notice that there's going to be a landscape material. Click on the little icon here. It'll take you to the actual material instance in your content browser. Open it. And all you need to do is change any setting. And in this case, I'm just going to uncheck this and check it again and click on save. And this is going to force Unreal to update the material. And notice that as soon as I do that, I'm going to click play here, the material has been applied properly and the grass has been removed from the path. So you can see here. And notice that the paths here to the individual props has also been removed. So instead of you having to doing it manually, you can automatically go ahead and apply the material. Now notice that the material is not applied here. So you can actually do that as well. If you click on any of the props, you'll see that there's two buttons here, flatten landscape and apply material. And this is going to do the exact same thing that the landscape material for the pathways here. The only reason I'm not including that automatically is because depending on your path on your prop, you may or may not want to do that. So if you want to, for example, apply a specific layer here, you can come here to the setup, select your landscape here, select the landscape layer index, and the layer index is going to be here on the paint. So layer 0, 1, 2, and 3. So layer 2, which is by default, is the dirt, and you can click on apply material. Notice that now we have dirt applied, and if we go ahead and update our material instance, now we have dirt around our Ferris wheel. If you wanted to have sand instead, you can change this to layer 3, apply the material, and you can see that there's sand. And in this case, you don't even have to update the landscape layer because the grass is gone. So why is this useful? Well, you may have some specific area props, for example, this guy right here, where you may want this guy to have sand, for example. So you can do it here. Select your landscape, apply material, update the material, go back here, and now you have a little sandy area where the kids can play, right? If you've been to kids parks, usually they have either gravel, straw, or sand, right? And the reason that you have this ability is because the base class for all of the props has the functionality to apply layers. All right, and you can do that either in bulk by selecting many different props or individually to the ones where you really need it. All right, after that, you have one more option, which is to convert the existing foliage into hierarchical instant static meshes. Now, if I click play here and I enable, I'm just going to show my FPS here, stat unit, you'll notice that it's still pretty performant. Right now, I'm getting about 75 frames per second or so right now, depending on where I'm looking. Right here, it's a little bit more because I'm looking at less materials. Depending on your machine, obviously these numbers may be different, but each individual tree, you can see, is a static mesh actor. So what I will do now is we're going to combine all of these trees into one hierarchical instant static mesh. This is basically how foliage works. So if you click on, for example, the flowers here, you'll see that all of the flowers are selected as one individual actor because they're all one actor. So we want to make sure that we do the same thing for the trees, and for all of the other props. For example, all of the lights, they're individual lights, right? You can select them individually. We're going to convert them to one single actor that has the hierarchical instant static mesh components. Now, the reason we spawn them as individual actors first is because we want to make sure that you have the ability to modify them. So I can go ahead and move this guy, right, to wherever I want. I'm going to undo that. Or I can even delete it, or I can clone it, right? So we want to make sure that we spawn them as individual actors so you guys can have the ability to modify them and change them. And then once you're happy, then only then we convert them, right? Once you convert them, there isn't really an easy way to go back. At least I haven't included that functionality here. So you want to make sure that you're happy with your park before you go ahead and do the conversion, right? So let's go ahead and convert them. And we go here and say, we want to convert the props from actors to HISM. And I go ahead and click here. And now if I click on my lights, oops, notice that all of the lights are now selected just by clicking on one. Same thing for my tables. Notice that even though they're scattered, all of the tables in the park are now one single actor. Same thing for all my kiosks here. They're one single actor, so you can see here. All right, and finally, we want to do the same thing for the foliage. We want to come back to the park. We want to say foliage A to HISM, actor to HISM, and we do that. And now all of our trees, so you can see, are one specific actor. And now if I click play, in this case, we probably gained about 2 or 3 frames per second. I was getting about 75, and now I'm getting about 78 to 79 if you look at the video top right corner. So in this case, for my machine, the performance improvement wasn't as big, but this is going to be more and more beneficial the bigger your park and the more dense your foliage. So if I had literally thousands and thousands of trees, then converting them would be even more and more important. And that is pretty much it. That is how you create your park. If you decided that you wanted to start over, we're going to go ahead and do this very quickly now. You can click on remove everything, delete everything, or you can actually do the option of removing only selected objects. So if you click, if you go down here to spawn data, you'll notice that we have a spawn history array. And if you expand this, you'll see that every single time we've spawned something, we created an entry in this array. This is basically similar to what Photoshop has, right, with the history list, where you can select any individual one of these spawns and you can remove it. So let's say that we want foliage 13. We wanted to remove that. We would select that and select remove selected, and that will remove it. Now this will only work before your conversion. So unfortunately right now you would have to click on remove everything. And once we do that, notice that everything is gone, but the material still has those layers painted. So one quick thing you can do is go back here to landscape, go to paint, and go to procedural. You can actually right click here and select fill layer, and will automatically fill the entire layer. You don't really even have to paint to get it back to where you wanted it. All right, that is pretty much it, guys. And now really quickly, we're gonna do several iterations just so you guys can see how fast this can be. Again, even though I said I was gonna do it quickly, I still went through every single step. So let's say now that you want to change, we're gonna change the foliage. Instead of this guy, I'm gonna make this percent chance to spawn 0, and I'm gonna do the pines percent chance to spawn 1. We want to do pines just so we can do more foliage, and we're gonna change this from really big to huge. And we're gonna go back and say set parameters, spawn central actors, create pathways, spawn props, spawn flowers, spawn foliage, and we're gonna select it a few times, spawn additional props, birds, and that's it. Very, very quickly, as you can see here, just literally within a few clicks, I can just click play, and you can see that we have a park. Then in this case, it's much bigger with a bunch of props. And very quickly, if I was happy with this, then I would apply the materials. Go ahead and delete everything. Make the park even bigger. Make it a massive park. Make sure that every time you change the size, you select set parameters, spawn central actors, create pathways, spawn props, flowers, foliage, additional actors, and once again you can see that we have a pretty good base to start over. So even though I took my time, you can do this in literally a minute if you wanted to make a really big park. And you can see here that now we have a lot more trees, so we want to make sure that we convert them to instant static meshes to keep performance high. All right. Alright guys, that's it for this video. This is the quick start guide. I know it was probably a little bit longer than planned, but I wanted to make sure that I went through all of the important options. Now after this, we're going to take it a little slower. We're going to look at all of the different options for the different elements here, and we're going to learn how to change the settings that will actually benefit us and make sure that we can create the park that we really want. Alright, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.